Scandal. An action or event regarded as morally or legally wrong and causing general public outrage. As most of us know, making mistakes is part of being human because none of us are perfect. However, throughout NHL history, there have been quite a few mistakes that were made that weren't easily forgotten. In this video, we're going to be going over the worst scandal from each team to come about in NHL history. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. It really helps the channel. And with that, here is the worst scandal from each NHL team. In pretty much every developed country these days, there's laws against workplace discrimination and prejudice. Because we as human beings have realized that, hey, just because someone is a particular race, gender, sexual orientation, etc., it doesn't affect their job performance in the slightest, given that there's not a hostile work environment, of course. Back when the Sidney Crosby sweepstakes were underway in 2005, Jason Bailey was drafted by the Anaheim Ducks 63rd overall. An Ottawa native, Bailey, just like many players do, made the choice to pursue college hockey by playing for the University of Michigan. Afterwards, though, the forward spent some time playing for various minor teams and leagues. And while it doesn't seem like much was happening statistically for Bailey, considering his hockey career, a lot more was going down beneath the surface. According to an article that I'll reference below from TMZ, Bailey decided to sue his former team back in 2011. The suit documents revealed how Bailey endured a barrage of anti-Semitic, offensive, and degrading verbal attacks. While going further into detail, Bailey claimed that the head coach of the Bakersfield Condors said, quote, "Jews only care about money, and who's who, and that he never wanted his son to be raised Jewish." Bailey also alleged that the coaching staff forced him to travel separately from the team and gave him limited ice time as well. Even more shockingly, Bailey claimed that the assistant coach from the Condors would also join in on the berating while saying things such as, quote, "Oh, I just got a friend request from a dirty Jew," end quote. Court documents also revealed that Bailey had previously complained to the Ducks about a hostile work environment and that the team reacted by simply asking the two responsible coaches to write him apology letters. Because obviously that makes stuff go away now, doesn't it? And while none of the allegations were proven in court, Bailey, who was traded to Ottawa in 2009, believed that the Ducks were happy to get rid of him. For those of us that have watched hockey long enough, especially the sport in its vintage form, we know that it can get pretty brutal. And while the most horrific injuries are usually accidental, there's been unfortunately scum like Matt Cook or Marty McSorely. While the regular season matchup in Vancouver probably just seemed routine for McSorely and Brasher, this was a game that changed both of their lives forever. McSorely, who had built a reputation for himself by the time the millennium rolled around, was known as a guy he just didn't want to mess with. However, it was Donald Brasher that made the mistake of poking the bear, pun intended. Early in the contest between the Bruins and Nucks, the two squared off and dropped the gloves. Brasher, who won the brawl, wasn't just content with skating off quietly to the penalty box. Instead, Brasher, who would probably later regret this, decided to taunt the away bench en route to the sin bin. Another thing that added fuel to the fire, per se, was the fact that Brasher made contact later in the game with Boston's goalie Byron Defoe. Defoe ended up leaving the game on a stretcher due to a knee injury. As the game was winding down, McSorely decided to make the worst mistake of his life. With less than 5 seconds on the clock, the forward struck his opponent right in the temple with his stick. A two-handed swing was enough to cause Brasher to fall instantly to the ice and for his helmet to come off before his head endured more impact. Due to the head trauma, Brasher had a seizure as the crowd watched in shock. Eventually, the Indiana native was taken off of the ice with the help of a stretcher. Now, I actually made a video that goes more in depth with McSorley's legal repercussions, and if you want to check that out, I'll link it below. In summary, as far as the courts were concerned, McSorley initially faced jail time, but was eventually given 18 months of probation instead. As for the NHL side of things, he was at first suspended indefinitely and made to pay a fine of over $72,000 in result. This was, and still is, the highest fine that an individual player has had to pay in NHL history. After sitting out for the remaining 23 games of the 1999-2000 season, McSorely never played another game. As for Brasher, he continued his NHL career and ended up reaching the 1,000 game threshold. This one isn't directly NHL related, but since the owner of the Buffalo Bills also owns the Sabres, I thought it was worthy enough to cover. As an NHL fan, if you've heard the name Terry Pegula before, you probably haven't heard such nice things. The multimillionaire decided to buy the Sabres back in 2011 and the Bills a few years later in 2014. While the Sabres struggled mightily to be competitive, the Bills, on the other hand, began to qualify for the postseason again in 2017. Now, this is definitely another he said, she said type of scenario. However, just like the Anaheim incident, it made front page news. Back in 2020, as most of us can recall, the Black Lives Matter initiative was a huge topic that shaped history in its own way. Unfortunately, though, allegedly, Pegula wasn't the biggest fan of the social cause. According to an NFL reporter, Jim Trotter, Pegula spoke with him regarding his opinions about the NFL's social justice initiatives and BLM. While doing so, Pegula didn't hold back, saying allegedly, quote, "If the black players don't like it here, they should go back to Africa and see how bad it is," end quote. Trotter later filed a racial discrimination lawsuit against Pegula. The lawsuit entails that Trotter pressed the executives at NHL Media for some kind of response following Pegula's hurtful words. And after getting brushed off on multiple occasions, according to ESPN, that was when the reporter took things into his own hands. It's also important to note that Pegula adamantly denied saying anything of the sort. He's quoted saying, "The statement attributed to me in Mr. Trotter's complaint is absolutely false." Pegula said, "I am horrified that anyone would connect me to an allegation of this kind. Racism has no place in our society, and I am personally disgusted that my name is associated with this complaint." Trotter, who was forced to move on due to not having his contract renewed by the NFL, was let go for reasons unrelated to the lawsuit, according to the league. But rather, it was allegedly a result of business decisions made to address a, quote, "challenging economy and a changing media environment," end quote. Alright guys, the NHL season is upon us, and you know what that means. It's time to stock up on all your favorite team's merch. And that's where Fanatics comes in, since they're the ones producing NHL jerseys for the time being. If you're planning to buy one or other Fanatics products, you can support me by simply using my link. Once the Fanatics site appears, you can make those purchases just like you would originally. My link will be down in the description for those who are interested. And now back to the video. Around the same time as the Mike Babcock-Mitch Marner incident made its way into the headlines, Coach Bill Peters found himself in the spotlight for all of the wrong reasons. In November of 2019, Akim Aliu decided to speak his truth. The truth, however, revealed some shocking allegations that immediately put Peters under a microscope. After Aliu was drafted in Chicago, 56th overall in 2007, he spent a considerable amount of time alternating between the AHL and OHL before making his NHL debut. But it was during those formative years in his career that Aliu had a coach he would never forget. Peters, who was just getting his foot in the door in the AHL level, began his tenure in Rockford at the start of the 2008-2009 season. And one of the players on his roster from 2008 to 2010 was Aliu himself. Aliu alleged that Peters made some discriminatory comments that were directed at him specifically. The comments seemed to come about due to Aliu's choice of music he was playing in the locker room. According to Aliu himself, following the incidents, Peters wrote a letter to Stan McDonough and Scott Bowman in an effort to have his players sent down to the ECHL thereafter. And around a decade after Aliu decided to reveal the controversial incident, his honesty resulted in Peters losing his job with the Flames a few days later. Even though Peters technically did resign, there's no doubt that his superiors gave him an ultimatum at that point, either to resign or to be fired instead. After coaching overseas in the KHL for a short time, Peters was fired due to having a poor coaching record. Back in 2007, this drafted defenseman Ian Cole, 18th overall. Cole, who will be suiting up for his 8th team this season, had been what you'd call a journeyman. Cole, who was able to capture back-to-back cups with Pittsburgh, eventually made his way to Raleigh in 2021. Cole was signed to a play-and-see deal valued at $2.9 million. The defenseman was recruited in order to supplement Carolina's stellar back end. And while Cole was recording 19 points in the 75 games he played, he also was allegedly doing some extracurricular things on the side. He reportedly became rather close with team reporter Abby Labar, who was working through Fox Sports at the time. In case you all don't know, it's pretty routine for the team reporters to travel with the team so that they can get some snippets from warm-ups and those ridiculously exciting interviews from intermissions. And yeah, that was a joke. So, it's not out of the question to say that something between Cole and Labar could have naturally formed through their interactions together. Now, what makes this all incredibly juicy is the fact that Cole, at the time of his tenure with the Canes, was married. They have also had 2 kids together over the span of their relationship. As for the other participant in the alleged affair, Abby wasn't married yet at the time. However, she was engaged. Her fiance, Chris Proctor, is a former football player who has been on the coaching side of the game for quite some time now. Now, we don't exactly know how the news of the affair leaked, but what we do know is that Proctor and Labar were planning to get married. And after the bombshell dropped that Cole and Labar were having alleged sexual encounters, Proctor called the wedding off entirely. The repercussions for this were pretty one-sided, if we're being real. As far as we know, Cole was never met with any slap on the wrist, or anything of the sort. Labar, on the other hand, was let go from the Hurricanes organization. She's currently hosting the show Quick Pitch for the MLB. As for Cole, he's going to be amongst the players on the debut roster for the Utah Hockey Club. Definitely the most serious and tragic incident on this list was the one that involved Kyle Beach. Drafted 11th overall in 2008 by Chicago, the sky was the limit for the forward coming in, as he was going to be joining an already stacked team. That was a dynasty waiting to make a name for itself. But it's what happened during the Blackhawks' 2010 Stanley Cup run that will forever be one of the worst events in NHL history. So we're going to keep things pretty mild in this video, but if you're interested in learning more, I'll link some sources below that go into greater detail. Once the news broke that Beach was suing his former team in 2021, the details of why surfaced thereafter. Even though Beach was filling in as a black ace at the time and technically not on the roster, he was spending time with the team, quite a bit as an alternate. And it was during that time Beach later claimed that video coach Brad Aldridge had used his position of coach inappropriately, and by threatening to end Beach's hockey career, Aldridge for a while got away with committing some troubling actions. When it was brought to former GM Stan Bowman and former coach Joe Quenneville's attention, they both failed to take action in order to protect their player. Not only were they both later fired, but the team was also fined $2 million by the league for their negligence. As for Beach, he and his former team were able to reach a settlement amount that suited both parties in December of the same year that the lawsuit leaked out into the news. In conclusion, while yes, we just scratched the surface here when considering all 32 teams, but I'm going to turn this into a mini-series, therefore stay tuned. If you enjoyed my content and are new to the channel, I'd like to invite you to subscribe. And for those of you who are consuming my content on the regular, consider joining my Patreon. If you're looking to see my videos days in advance, see unseen analytics, and be the first to know most channel happenings, Patreon is where it's at. For the cost of a cup of coffee per month, you can receive all of these benefits and more. However, if you don't want to commit, I also have some unseen content you can purchase on the site as well. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.